Thank you to the author, Swati Narayan. Thank you to BIC for doing this. Thank you to all of you for coming. The book is on sale outside. I would highly recommend that you buy a copy. I've been reading it the last 4 or 5 days. It's extremely enlightening, even for people who think they know the sector, who think they might know the data. We'll begin by asking the author to speak about the book for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Aakar, and thanks to every one of you in this room. I've just come from Jaipur, but this is particularly special because I have my non-reclusive editor here, Ajita, and this book really wouldn't have come to life without her. So, big lot of love to Ajita and a round of applause. And there's so many friends in this room. There's Sudha here, and I'm sure many others, George, and many others that I haven't seen yet. And all of you are in Bangalore. Thank you so much for coming. So let me start with my allotted 10 minutes. Okay, so as Orwell said, in a time of universal deceit, just telling the truth is a revolutionary act. And that's really all I've tried to do with this book. For the last 20 years, I've been looking at data, and it clearly shows that women in Sri Lanka live 10 years longer on an average than women in India. Bangladeshi women live 4 years more, and Nepali women a year more. This is what the facts tell us. And what I've been trying to figure out through especially the last 10 years is what are the reasons for this. So this book is based on my doctoral research, where I traveled to these countries. I did a primary survey across 80 villages, 1,600 households, and this was across Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bihar. I also looked at a lot of secondary data, historical research, and the simple conclusion that I came to at the end of it is the title that Ajita has given to the book, which is Unequal. So I think India lags behind its neighbors because India is a republic of extreme inequalities. And the main culprit for India's slow and lopsided social development is multiple layers of severe inequalities which amplify and aggravate each other. So as I write in the book, the differences in the life chances of the rich and poor, men and women, Brahmins and Doms, and for that matter, Keralites and Biharis, Hindus and Muslims across India are so sharp that unless these inequalities are bridged, it is impossible for the nation as a whole. It is impossible for the nation as a whole to prosper, let alone be a world leader or a Vishwaguru. So the book focuses only on 3 of these extreme inequalities of caste, class, and gender. And in terms of class, after electoral bonds, we realize that perhaps we are a country of the rich, for the rich, by the rich, and we're turning from a plutocracy perhaps into a kleptocracy. And the millionaires in India are increasing very rapidly, while the bottom half of our population has only 6% of the nation's wealth. In terms of caste, 41% of India's wealth is now in the hands of the forward caste, twice their population share. And in terms of women, we have not only 41 million women missing from our population, but 21 million women missing from electoral roles due to low literacy. On the other hand, what I found is that though Bangladesh and Nepal are poorer than us, they have leapfrogged ahead because they've been able progressively over decades to reduce inequalities with public services, social movements, and women's agency. So in the case of Bangladesh, I speak about elite displacement, which has happened in 3 waves of partition in 1905, 1931, and 1971. In Nepal, there's been a caste and a gender transformation with the Jan Andolans, the Maoist People's War, the Dalit movement. Within India, on the other hand, it's not like everything is bleak. There are vast differences between the north and the south. So in one chapter of the book, I speak about Tamil Nadu and the Dravidian and the Dalit movement, all of which stemmed from the 1920 Non-Brahmin Manifesto. In Kerala, about the anti-caste movements, which were then spurred by the 1981 Malayali Memorial. and various other social movements. In Sri Lanka, which was the first country where women in Asia got the right to vote. So in conclusion, in this age of hyper-nationalism and post-truth, all that I hope that our leaders will do is admit that India, as a doctor, can cure a patient only when they admit that the patient is sick, rather than living in delusion. So going back to George Orwell, he also writes in 1984, "The people will not revolt, they will not look up from their screens long enough to notice what is happening." But the aim of this book, and I'm hoping everyone in the audience will look up, notice what is happening. And this book is a small drop in the ocean of Baba Sahib Ambedkar's clarion call: educate, agitate, and organize. Thank you.
There's a lot in the book that I found interesting, which was anecdotal. Could you describe your field work, how you went about it, what the scope was, and how long it took?
Sure. So while I was forced to write a lot of anecdotes in the last draft of the book so as to make it readable for a larger audience, the original work was a PhD, so it had the academic rigor associated with it. So how long it took, the PhD of its own took 5 years. The book took another 4 or 5 years after that. In terms of the method, I, with great care, chose specific districts in Nepal, Bangladesh, and in Bihar, which were geographically contiguous. Based on census records, randomized the selection of villages, and then the selection of houses even within villages. And then I also, apart from 1,600 households, also went to 200 plus schools, 400 health centers, and hired a team of 40 women in order to do this, who spoke local languages. So it was really exhaustive. But at the end of it, the primary data was saying very similar things to what the secondary data was showing us, which is that Bihar, as representative of large parts of northern India, lags behind.
Would that say to us that the data coming out from the state is more or less accurate, and that if your ground material corroborated what the state puts out, it seems to be that that is the case?
Yeah. Not necessarily what the government puts out, but what, for example, the Asar survey puts out, that children in Bihar, half the children in Bihar are not able to read their textbooks. Whereas in Bangladesh, so I recreated that same format and I translated it into Bangla, and 90% of the children in Bangla were able to read that paragraph, and in Nepal it was around 67%. The Pratham has never done its survey across South Asia, so that was the first time doing it. But their Bihar numbers were identical to my Bihar numbers. So I knew I was not off track. The other thing I ensured was I created a wealth index. So the households that I was surveying in Bihar had a similar wealth profile to those across the border. So I was comparing apples with apples.
So there's 40 villages in Bihar that you go to one after the other, and you do a similar study in each of these, and then you do a similar study across the border in Nepal in similar numbers of villages. And what would that study look like on any given Monday or Tuesday? What would you be doing?
So I had it so I would go to every district. First I did a recce across the districts that were chosen. Then I hired a team of 10 women in each of these places. So I started with Bangladesh, hired 10 Bengali-speaking women in the local dialect, went with the Bengali questionnaires, and unfortunately at the time I was doing it, I didn't do an online survey. It was actually physical paper. So I used to come back carrying huge bags, and I only traveled not by flight, but by bus and train, and walked across borders. So on a day, I would be following with my translator, doing, let's say, 5 households in a day, and I kept it quite relaxed. Every researcher would do 2 villages, and they would cover a total of 40 households. and I would train them in a local, let's say, school for 3 days before they started out on their survey.
And the household that you would go to would be asked what? And
okay. So the questions were very specific on human development, because that's what we find that India is lagging behind. Though our growth is extraordinarily good, we're richer than our neighbors. Education, healthcare, nutrition, and sanitation in our neighbors is better. So everything from checking out whether they have a clean toilet, whether everybody uses the toilet, to what is the education level of members of the family, can the child read a paragraph, do women know what's good for their health, what did they eat the previous night, to check nutrition. So there were very specific survey questionnaire, and that was an hour in each household, then translated in 3 languages.
this seems to me to be the sort of thing that many more people ought to be doing. Are they doing this? Because the only other person I can think of who's done this would be Sen in the 50s or whenever it was that he began his work. Do people in economics departments and such things do this sort of field work at scale?
That's the beauty of working with Jean Drèze, right? So he was my co-guide for this PhD. I lived in Jharkhand throughout the 6 years of doing this. And I think what makes, so Jean does surveys like this, and so do his team with Ritika and others. I think the difference and the reason that he does that, researchers do that, is when you don't have donor money. Because oftentimes, if the donors dictate the kind of surveys that you have to do, then it may not be so grounded.
And just to go back to the previous question, the rigor required you to have only those villages that had been marked out beforehand.
Yeah.
And can you tell us the story which you've written about here of what happens when you go to a village which has been marked out but you can't find access?
Yeah. So I usually would try to go to the first option village that is there. Of course, there was a bit of convenience sample. If you absolutely cannot do a village, you take another one. But I was quite persistent. So in one of the villages, there was a lot of hostility. People thought we were spies when we went in. And of course, I would not speak in Bangla at all, my Bangla is quite bad. But my translator figured out that they thought that we were spies. And when we thought, what do you mean spies? They said they thought we were election observers because the local election was coming up and there was high levels of corruption. But what I do always, and this is something I've learned through the years, is just be patient, just wait. And we waited, just had a meal, waited, started talking to the local villagers, and soon enough a widow gave us her room. So we stayed there for a whole week and did the survey. So this is how pretty much I've always done my fieldwork. Just go with the tide.
And you developed either during the process of writing your thesis or before it a sort of index of your own. What were the things that constituted it? And maybe once you explain that to us, we can go into the hard data. Okay.
So while I was collecting all this data from the survey, it was important to collate it together so that it can be comparable across countries. So I just created very simple composite index of it, clubbing together all the questions on education, clubbing together all the ones on health and nutrition, sanitation, and creating a human development index, and trying to see whether that was in some way or the other related to 3 factors, one of which was the availability of public services like schools and health centers. The other, which was a very interesting idea, I thought, was about social distance between the providers of any service, be it teachers or health workers, and the villagers. And the last one was about women's empowerment. And if I can just jump ahead and speak about social distance. So the final data seemed to show that the reason that Bihar was lagging behind was because lack of availability of public services, but the correlation also with social distance was quite high compared to Nepal and Bangladesh. And women's empowerment was highest in Nepal, second in Bangladesh, and last in Bihar. And then I had proxies for figuring out women's empowerment. Can you go to the market without permission from your husband? Who eats first in the house? Is it a man or is it a woman? And this was something I was very surprised by, because in India, I've grown up assuming in many cases that women eat last in the household. And my data clearly showed me that in Bangladesh, they were laughing when I asked them this question. They said, no, of course not, we eat first. And same in Nepal, except in the Terai regions of Nepal, which have a Bihari culture. So I realized that I really need to, all of the assumptions that I went with before. The data was telling me that social distance was a really important problem, and that women had greater freedoms in Nepal. And for some reason, the rulers in Bangladesh and Nepal seem to have invested in public services. And I wanted to figure out what was that reason. I didn't want to look at it just as an economist and then end with the numbers, but what was the reason and the story behind those numbers. So then I leaped into history.
Could you expand social distance?
Okay. Sure. So this is a concept that Jean Drèze and Amartya Sen write in their book, that when the caste of the teacher is different from the caste of the student, they tend to talk down to the student. This is something you can see very clearly in Bihar. And what I saw in my survey in school after school after school was that children don't even have a desk to sit in. They sit on the floor with, sometimes they will just bring a jute bag or a rice bag from home and sit on that. And the teacher will have, of course, a chair. The caste differential between them was making a huge impact. But in many schools, the teacher would just not show up. And then I realized that perhaps could be the reason why teachers, health workers, after the pay commission are getting fantastic salaries, but they don't care to come to school because it's not their children, it's of another caste. And as Baba Saheb Ambedkar said, the caste system justifies you to suppress a lower caste. I mean, classrooms have been monopolies of the upper caste for generations.
And so should one assume that in the neighboring states, that difference in caste did not exist, or it was from similar castes that you found teachers coming into school?
Okay, this is a long story. Okay, so in the case of Bangladesh, as a Muslim country, Muslim majority country, the caste differences amongst the Muslim population has changed a lot in contemporary Bangladesh. And then I looked at 3 historical waves of elite displacement, where both the Hindu zamindari class left in 1905 partition and then 1947 to West Bengal. They migrated, and the upper crust of the Muslim society migrated. The Urdu speaking went back to Pakistan in 1971. So what was left, I found, so we went door to door asking people, what is your Bongsha naam or your Jati name? What's your last name in Bangladesh? And people had no idea what their last name was in Muslim households. In Hindu households, they did know what their last name was, very proudly told us their caste. And this made me realize that there was large homogeneity right now in Bangladesh amongst the Muslim population. So within classrooms, not only do NGOs teach methods of joyful learning, it's extraordinary. In the same classroom, I would find, for example, a female teacher wearing a burqa, hugging children in the classroom. And that is such a stark contrast to Bihari classrooms. So this is the Bangladesh story. And then in terms of Nepal...
Before you go there,
sure.
Is this a homogeneity that has been created? Did it always exist? What is the root?
Right. So it's like in the villages, you will see Brahmin padas, hamlets, right? Which used to be Brahmin padas and now no longer, because most of the Hindu population has left.
Within the Muslim population, I meant.
Right. So within the Muslim population, so then I also went into further roots and how, for example, the variant of Islam in Bangladesh is quite different from the one in Pakistan. There are a lot of Sufi origins to it. And the Turkish origin gave a lot of prominence to egalitarianism as opposed to the one in Pakistan, which is a more biradari culture. I did find, and I kept asking even people in Dhaka to cross-check if I'm making such a claim, and they said, no, that's absolutely right. There is, at least in rural areas, there's a high level of homogeneity.
And in Nepal?
Okay, so Nepal is a completely different story, and I know many of you all would have traveled to all of these countries and would have had your own experiences. So Nepal, in the 10 years before the Maoist war and after the Maoist war, is a completely different thing. And I wouldn't have expected that the Maoist war would have had an impact on caste. But I met a local journalist and he told me that I was just asking all the wrong questions by not exploring that angle. So Nepal's caste system is far more, was before, very different from India's caste system with more layers. They had enslavable castes. In fact, the situation was such that before the war, that a Dalit could not sit in the same room as an upper caste person, and if he did, then cow urine was poured to purify it. And many people had told me this about Nepal when I used to go there before the war. But after the war, and I'm just actually back from Nepal, because of the Maoist movement, the Jan Andolans, the Dalit movement has become so strong now that at the World Social Forum that I was at, they had a Dalit parliament. So right now, half the women in the Panchayat elections, the recent elections, were Dalit women who've been elected. And the Maoists, apparently, during the war years, used to encourage intercaste marriages. They used to encourage intercaste dining. Communities which previously never ate beef in the Tabangi area, they have now started eating beef because warriors do create survival instincts and a change. And the Maoists apparently, so it was not only a class war, it was also a caste war, because most of the Maoist cadres were actually coming from the marginalized caste, and they were fighting for a Naya Nepal, which would be free from caste discrimination, where women would have greater freedoms. And today, when you go to the World Social Forum, you could see the fruits of that, which didn't, and you can see even the data indicators of maternal mortality, infant mortality changing after the war years, including during the war years, when, yeah, it's quite extraordinary in terms of the human development. And the latest multidimensional poverty index for Nepal is showing tremendous improvement. So the fruits have come after democracy, but the seeds were planted during the war, during the Jan Andolan, when all the political parties came together to overthrow the monarchy. And the 2015 Nepali constitution is one of the most progressive constitutions, as you would have read, which has all of these rights, right to health, education, an entire panorama of rights.
Just to link back to the question earlier, how would the difference manifest in the classroom in Nepal? Okay. And also, just to add to are we to understand that in Nepal, the government's thrust and focus on the human development indicators is higher than it would be here? As reflected in the budget, for instance?
Yeah. I did look at the budget. It's not made it to the book, but it was there in the PhD. So they do spend more. They also have created this thing called community schools. So there's a lot of emphasis on not only the government investing in a teaching cadre, and not like in India, small things make a big difference. Textbooks come on time. In every classroom, both in Bangladesh and Nepal, I saw flex posters, which helps children to learn. Everywhere with just a coat of paint, there would be multiplication tables on the wall, so children would learn. Both countries, the teachers are paid lesser, but more money is spent on classroom environment. They all had benches and desks. The textbooks were there. Community schools is an innovation in Nepal, where with community forestry program and other activities where communities generate money, in India, we have a Forest Rights Act, and half the pattas have not been given to Adivasi communities, even though they've applied. In Nepal, I saw there was a lot of prosperity amongst villages, and the money they make from selling, let's say, non-timber forest produce or bamboo, etc., they use and divide across different castes. There's a woman's budget, man's budget, there is even a children's budget for local development. So they'll do solar lamps, you don't have a teacher, you get an extra teacher. So there is a focus on human development. They have a really good healthcare system. During COVID, actually it's a regular practice in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, families cross the border, go to Nepal and get free medicines there. Some of those free medicines have come from India, but we don't deliver it in our Bihari health clinics. So there's a lot to learn just crossing borders.
Can you talk to us about families that straddle Bihar and Nepal and what the difference is in the same family that has people who migrate back and forth?
Yeah, so I was doing a lot of work in the border areas. I don't know about families who, I didn't do so much in-depth anthropological research on families that go back and forth, but I did meet one Dalit family which was right near the border with Nepal, and actually there was a funeral there, and I just happened to have gone to meet them, and you could see, so I interviewed them, and you could easily see that they were really smartly dressed. They didn't feel the sting of discrimination. They told me their children in the classroom learned for free, healthcare was free. Both the husband and wife had good jobs, one in a private canteen, one was working as a mechanic. But their Indian counterparts, actually the funeral was for somebody who had died of liver cirrhosis because Bihar is a dry state, and there's a lot of toxic alcohol flowing. Healthcare is non-existent in those villages, and the levels of discrimination that I saw both in Musahar hamlets and in Dome hamlets. Musahars are rat eaters with a population of 2 million across Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, and levels of literacy are less than 30%. There is just no public services to speak of.
You spoke about the difference between Bangladesh and India when it came to how governance is conducted on the issue of toilets. Can you just tell us how they have done their Swachh Bharat and how it's different from ours?
Sure. So Swachh Bharat is something that all of us know about in 2014. But I've been traveling to Nepal much before, and Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, I used to see these cement rings in every village. Thank you. And so the government there was, in Swachh Bharat, you get 12,000 rupees, and this is the cash that the government gives you, and you go and build your toilet. But the cement rings is what the Bangladeshi government gave to poor families, and their focus instead was on Uthan Baitaks, which is just group discussions. It's called community-led total sanitation, where they raise awareness about communities that if you don't use a toilet, in effect what's happening is your waste is going to the rivers, and you're washing your vessels in those rivers, and so you're eating your own waste, your own shit. But so a lot of focus is on awareness, and even now, so 10 years before Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, Bangladesh was open defecation free. There are also other reasons for it, including Islam and the focus on great hygiene. There is a whole hadith on hygiene.
Is it open defecation free in the sense that India is, or there is a genuine sense of achievement on the ground?
I can guarantee you and say that genuine achievement on the ground, because people who build their own toilets tend to use them.
And you described these structures. I couldn't quite understand what they look like. You say that they don't have doors, but they have a lungi or a sari as a curtain, and they're made of cement rings. How does that work?
No, so the cement ring is to build the base, right? You put it in on the ground, and on top of that you have your ceramic. In India, you use ceramic. They have very cheap, low-cost plastic, I don't know what you call it, pan. And the structure is just bricks. Oftentimes there was no roof. And instead of a door, to reduce cost, they would just put a lungi with 2 buttons on 2 sides. So it was a low-cost, hygienic, and the reason I can say with such surety is because that's what I used throughout my time there. And in Bihar, I would struggle to find a toilet, and the only person who would have one is a local politician, because there was a rule that you can't stand for elections unless you have a toilet. So, yeah.
It's hard to understand for me, and I'm sure for other people as well, that within a few kilometers of one another, why should there be such a large, is the word the cultural difference? What is it that accounts for higher usage of toilet on one side of the border than the other, even while both the governments are focused on this?
Right. So it's both government and it's culture. So culture, like I said, in the case of Bangladesh, Islam is very particular about hygiene. And there's a hadith that, you have to take your left foot in when you enter into a toilet. The Quran says if you don't find sand, if you don't find water, then use sand or soil. And so I found in Bangladeshi toilets, they use tissue paper. For women, I saw little plastic bags which had cloth in them across the toilets that I went to. Hygiene is really important, even in small village shops. I mean, the villages are really clean. Village shops, they'll give you tissue paper to wipe your hand. So there is a cultural emphasis, definitely. But more than that, I think it's a government emphasis where the government is not giving you something. The government is helping to educate you, make you aware of how important human development or hygiene is for yourself, and helps you, if you're poor, to build your own toilet. The cost of toilets is also lesser. We like to build large toilets for the simple reason that only Dalits will clean the toilet, right? So, and of course, I have to say this is also a problem in Bangladesh. I found that Dalits in Bangladesh are the most discriminated against, and even today, things like cleaning of the toilet is given to Dalit communities.
But there is no Dalitness in Islam there, is there?
There is. You have both Muslim Dalits and Hindu Dalits.
Could you now run us through some of the hard data and depress us slightly further on?
I know you sound so depressed
So
already.
On the indicators that you looked at, what would be the difference between the three countries that you studied, and on what fields?
Okay, so I'm trying to remember everything on the top of my head, and that's quite a struggle.
The book has a very rich appendix section. It has about 150 pages of data. And for that alone, there's like 200 pages of a thesis, but there's also hard data collated, which makes it really valuable.
Yeah, so just look at the book for the hard data. All I will say is the 40 villages that I looked in Bihar, across parameters, they were lower than both the Bangladeshi and the Nepali villages. In terms of education, very clearly, children in Bangladesh were easily able to read their textbook, that one paragraph that I gave them. In Bangladesh and in Bihar, they weren't able to. I'm really sorry, I just can't remember all the hard data off the top of my head.
So it would be infant mortality, I suppose, would be one you would have.
Oh, right. So those were all from secondary data, which I have not did in my primary survey, but that has been showing us this for the last 20 years. Infant mortality is lower in these countries. The only area that India does better is maternal mortality, because we give a Janani Suraksha Yojana, which is a cash grant for about 6,000 rupees to encourage mothers to give birth in hospitals. So that has worked well in India. But in Bangladesh, you have community clinics that work. In Nepal, you have health posts. In terms of other data, literacy rates, in fact, especially adolescent literacy rates, so I put a graph there that shows that how over the last 5 decades, very quickly, you have to remember that in 1951, Nepal was a monarchy and was isolated from the world. The levels of literacy were in the 20%. And this huge, fast catch-up with India has happened only since then. And the rapidity of it has been after democracy.
Yeah. Would it be fair to say, from the point of view of the government of India, that larger population, bigger state, more diversity, all three states are improving on the Human Development Index compared to a decade ago and compared to 2 or 3 decades ago. We might be slightly slower, but that is an issue that is linked to size rather than to competence.
Right, so everybody asks me this, but I was looking at states in India which have similar population and population density as compared to Bangladesh and compared to Nepal. So I don't think population is the factor. The factor is political will and administrative ability. And this can change. So there is the depressing part of the book, which is about the North, but there's also the South, which shows clearly that you can have women in Kerala live as long as American men. So this can be achieved within the same Indian context. You try NREGA, same program in the North, it doesn't work. You do it in the South, and 90% of women in NREGA in Kerala are women, more than 90%, 95%.
Before we move on, since you touched, the index in the book says that it's something like 35% in UP and Bihar. Of all the people who are working in Narega, in UP and Bihar, it's about 35% of the people are women. In Kerala, 90% of the people working in Narega are women. She says also that one reason that women tend to gravitate towards the program is that it's lower daily wage than other labor. What else would, how are we to understand this difference between North and South and men and women?
Right. So actually I've written a separate paper in Gender and Development where I look at just Narega, 2 papers I've written, across India. So one is literacy rates. Second, the availability of Narega in the biggest problem in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. It's not that women don't want to join Narega. The NREGA mate will not give you work. That's the problem. There's depression of demand and suppression of demand, and this is something that we've been fighting for a long time. At any wages, women will be more likely to, because at higher wages is what men will get either in agriculture or in outside market. So men prefer to take outside jobs, and because it's a family 100-day guarantee, right? And send women to Narega work. The other thing is, not only in Kerala, even in other states like Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, they have made arrangements like creches by ensuring type of work is suitable for women. And in Kerala, they have linked it to the Kudumbashri program. So if something like that were to be done in the North, the point is only political will and administration, but at one level. But the real point of it actually is the bridging of social distances, because the administration in the South is more egalitarian. After the anti-caste movements, I show in one of the graphs how in Tamil Nadu, the character and the composition of the bureaucracy changed within 5 decades of the non-Brahmin manifesto. So previously, Brahmins dominated the bureaucracy, and that completely changed by the 1970s. So they're also more willing to work in rural areas to ensure greater benefits. And I think that is what is crucial.
Would it be accurate to say that there is a paradox of some sort here, that your thesis emphasizes one part of it on social movements long term,
yes,
a century even.
Yeah.
But Bangladesh, as you have pointed out, eclipsed India on these indicators recently, which would lead us to believe that there's something external to large social movement, long-term change that has happened in Bangladesh that hasn't happened here, or is happening here but at a much slower pace.
No. Bangladesh has been going ahead of us in social indicators for the last 20 years. So in 2005 was when I was working with an NGO and I looked at the numbers, and Jean Drez had written an article. So 20 years. Nepal in the last 10 years only. When
was the last time that India was ahead on average or in median terms of Bangladesh on the HDI index?
Okay, so on HDI, actually India does well, because HDI combines income with education and health. So since we do well on income, we just use that as an excuse to get ahead. But nowadays what's happened is, whether it's HDI, whether it's MPI, whether it's hunger index, whether it's any of the other indices, including happiness, either Bangladesh or Nepal or both will be ahead of us on all of these indices, the whole range, health index, education index. And of these two countries, both Bangladesh and Nepal, till recently, were poorer than us. But in this year, Bangladesh has overtaken us in per capita income. So, and I could feel the buzz of that when I was in Bangladesh, that villages have factories, agro-processing factories. So you know that this is a developing economy, and it's the same as the Sri Lanka or the Kerala model, that first you build your human development of your country, that then fosters growth and development, because you have an educated workforce to work in those factories.
What would you say to the argument the government tends to put forward of late, that indices such as the one mapping hunger are wrong? And does somebody with this richness in terms of fieldwork and travel and so on find that the data or your eyes and your ears corroborate what the data says?
Completely. I mean, I agree that during COVID, World Hunger Index did change their method, but otherwise the method has remained the same for the last 20 years. You had Dr. Manmohan Singh admitting at that time also we were not doing well on these indices, and he said malnutrition is a national shame. But the current regime is just very prickly about all international indicators which show India in bad light. It's not like there's been a big change. If you look at it over the last several years, we've done badly. We are a developing country, and I think we just need to accept that and then try to cure it.
And of the three things in the main that you say are responsible for transformations, which is public services, social movements, and women's agency, where do you think the role of the state is lacking most here?
Someone said women's agency, and I would agree with you. But there are also lots of things that the state cannot do about women's agency, like who eats last in the household, right? But there is a lot more that should be done. I completely agree with you. But I think it's, okay, so I would rather use the word public action, which Jean-Andres and Amartya Sen use, which is not just state responsibility, but also public action to make the state responsible. So, and that happens through, for example, anti-caste movements or social movements that we are all associated with, where we push governments, and only then will there be accountability. So, the worst, perhaps, and why we need a caste census is social distance. That then results in lack of public services, because we just don't care. We are a completely divided, unequal society. And like Baba Sahib Ambedkar said, with graded inequality, every caste is trying hard to suppress the caste that's lower than them. So there is no, especially in Bihar, you can see this, there is no social solidarity. If an Anganwadi doesn't work, nobody wants to come together and fight in the local ward office or the district office. And the officer will just sit on his high chair and do nothing.
Are there economists on the other side that have an argument that is at variance with yours and with Jean-Andres? And if so, what would it constitute in the main?
Of course. Of course, economists never agree on anything, and Jean-Andres and Amartya Sen are forever, I think, trying to keep quiet while there are lots of... So I wouldn't answer for that, but I would say that their argument, largely, if I were to summarize it, would be one set of economists are giving more emphasis to distribution, with or without growth, but distribution is being more important, with then growth, which will in future lead to growth. The other set of economists, which I think are currently popular, are only giving emphasis on growth, not so worried about distribution, assuming that that will trickle down. But the thing, especially in a country like India that has generational history of inequalities, is that growth does not trickle down. Look at our billionaires now. The bottom half of India's population has 6% of the country's wealth. We're increasing billionaires at an increasing rate. And with electoral bonds, what we've realized is they're also hijacking our democracy. They've just bought over everything.
What is wrong if the Gujaratis own everything? India has a smaller economy than Germany's, but we have more billionaires as of last year. that we have an economy 1/5 and perhaps 1/6 the size of China's, but the two richest Asians are Gujarati men, which is a paradox. But and I don't think that sufficient outrage comes from these facts, that you have this small cabal that controls everything. Are there, this might be a banal question, but are there things that the state could do easily that could correct some of the problems? And if so, what would these be?
Oh, so the book is full of ideas, hopefully, about just that. And that's why I wanted to target it at policymakers. So I'm going to try and show you the simplest one. So as I keep speaking about classrooms, you'll have all seen this optician's chart, right? To get your specs, right? So I saw this stuck in one of the Bangladeshi classrooms, and I asked them, what is this for? And then they demonstrated to me that this is this cute little program called Little Doctors. So in India, if you can't see, you go to a doctor, right? Instead, they integrated health in education. Children wear lab coats, pretend to be doctors. Every year, they check each other's eyesight. So that way you don't have to conduct a doctor's camp. You don't have to send an expensive doctor to the school or to the village. And the children who cannot read are told, okay, now go and get spectacles. They also check are taught to check each other's height and weight. Can you imagine if we did that in India? I've been working on nutrition for 15, 20 years. So we are just waiting for the Anganwadi worker to put forged data in her little tablet. Let children help each other and let mothers help each other. So this culture of solidarity happened in Bangladesh. So a lot of, for example, Naomi Hussain has written a wonderful book as a sociologist. And she's a Bangladeshi. And she says it's not actually the liberation war. It is the famine that happened in 1974 that created this culture in Bangladesh of we have to help each other. We cannot wait for the government all the time. And we are the government. So there is a lot of emphasis, both in Bangladesh and Nepal, having seen warriors, to just being self-sufficient. And I think that we can learn from them. I think most of all, we need to stop being arrogant, that we are a superpower, be humble and learn. So they learned this from Japanese classrooms in Bangladesh. And there's so many low-cost ideas that I've put in there that hopefully policymakers will read.
We do have a fairly robust exchange with the Nepali population, which yes, both of us can move freely and work and so on, which is a good thing. What is, since you spoke about arrogance, what is the nature of the state's engagement on development issues at that level? Okay, so this, in every question I try to go back to history and then study contemporary politics or sociology. In the case of Nepal, I was just tabulating the numbers of how many years have the left parties been in power. So the Maoist movement itself was a left movement, but ever since, Nepali democracy is very fragile. I mean, there have been literally prime ministers every year, but the left parties, it's been a rotation between left and center-left. So most of them are emphasizing public services, public policies. They're very committed to it. It is the only country in all of Asia to have a universal pension for the elderly. Now, governments very rarely do anything for the elderly. They usually do it for children or adults. So they have that. The constitution has right to health, right to education, because of the left emphasis for this. And in what sense does the government of India engage with the development agencies in Nepal or the ministries to see whether there is something that can be learned or taught, for that matter? Okay, I can give you an anecdote which is not in the book, but from my experience many years ago. I'd gone to a minister's conference. This was many years ago with other regimes, and there was an African minister there along with our education minister, and he was so condescending to the Africans because he said the size of your country is the size of our district. And that's pretty much how we treat all other countries except for China. We say, you have a billion population, we'd perhaps learn from you. And of course, the Western countries. But I think the culture of learning from other developing countries, or even considering ourselves to be developing country, doesn't exist. And that is where the arrogance stems from. I do feel so. I mean, working in the villages, I truly feel that there is a high level of arrogance.
at every session that I've had like this, everyone has told me, oh, but we are India, they can't believe the numbers, you know, oh, our population is so large. So I feel, I think we're just in denial that we're a developing country. That is the arrogance, that's all.
What would be the obvious pushbacks against a thesis which said, okay, with Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and transfers, we've sorted out the problems of poverty, of health insurance, of education to some extent, and the state can, in a frictionless way, make sure that whatever to the best of the state's ability can be transferred, is transferred, and then you have the agency of the family or of the individual to do what they want to with that money. That this constitutes by itself a development model, and
right.
the state needn't get into building hospitals and schools or running them efficiently.
Right. So actually, that's where things are moving towards, right? And especially as India, we've always had a tendency, because we're a richer country, to throw money at problems. Whereas in these countries, because they're poorer, what they're trying to do is try to make the most of the available resources, is what I've realized. We would be more likely even to give scholarships and other things, but they will, you know, focus more on having the teacher there. As for Aadhaar and Jan Dhan, and I write about the starvation death, so I've also been an activist and, you know, working in Jharkhand. It's wreaked havoc. Yeah.
Jean Reyes has actually written and documented this quite a lot. Have either Bangladesh or Nepal taken on or considered the idea of this Jan Dhan Aadhaar sort of model?
They don't have the money, no.
So it requires a lot of, it needs a corpus to be able to start it and maintain it, which is...
They do have national identity cards. I heard some rumors somewhere they're thinking of biometric, but I really hope that they don't necessarily go down that path, because the exclusions are so huge, especially in a population like India. I really don't understand where it makes sense, unless, of course, if it was a voluntary program, but it's not voluntary.
Because it seems to me that it makes the life of the state slightly easier, or a lot easier.
Not in a village where people don't even know what their birth date is. They don't know which year they were born. So they're full of mistakes. There is no English spelling for people. So many get excluded, and we spend half our time just trying to get them into this system that was not designed for them.
I have two last questions, and we'll go to the audience.
Can we do a little bit of the southern states, please?
Please.
No, I just wanted to say...
So there's a chapter, the concluding chapter on, in the book is called Southern Stars, and it talks about the paradox between the North and the South.
Yeah, and especially because we're in the South, I really wanted to ensure. I don't study Karnataka, but from Tamil Nadu and Kerala, comparing it to Sri Lanka, what I've realized is even with India's resources, it's not like we are necessarily a deficient country of some sort. The point is the whole progress in the southern states has been driven by social movements. And because I'm part of them, I feel that it really needs to be emphasized that unless you fight for change, whether it's identity politics, whether it's politics for basic necessities, food, clothing, shelter, etc., that is what has transformed Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and it can happen anywhere in India. But I look at the 100-year history. So Kerala's caste system was worse than what Bihar's caste system is today. You had not only untouchability, you had unseeability, castes could not look at each other, and it was wave upon wave of fighting, creating a Malayali identity, a pan-Malayali identity, that has brought about this transformation. And I also speak about the Chanar upper cloth revolt, where women fought for 50 years for the right to just wear a blouse, because oppressed caste women were not allowed to. In Tamil Nadu, the fact that both the DMK and the AIDMK draw their roots from the Dravidian self-respect movement, from the non-Brahmin manifesto, is so important, because that is why everything from Tamil cinema to the spoken language is more egalitarian, it has changed considerably, and gives a lot of emphasis to dignity and ensuring that people have the basic necessities of life with a ration card. this is not a coincidence that their PDS system is better than the PDS system in Bihar. It took 100 years. So these are just the fruits of it.
Are we to understand, are we saying, or is it the implication that the role of society here is much larger than the role of state? And if North is to learn from South, it's the Northerner that needs to fix himself rather than the state under Modi?
I think the state is a product of society, right? We're the ones who are voting, we're the ones who are getting elected, we're the ones who, forming the bureaucracy, etc. Right? It's all us. And that's why I wrote a popular book, hoping that this would just wake people up to realize because I'm part of social movements, I realize the power of the collective. If you're fighting together for something, if the South has developed so much and can teach the North so much, if the North is actually the one that's making India lag behind, they can, of course, learn from the South. But we can also do so much collectively. There is no need for despondency. And I didn't want that to be how the book ends. There is great diversity within India of really amazing things happening, just like in our neighbors. All we need to do is have hope and work collectively as opposed to fighting with each other, as caste do.
I have two last questions. One is, if we continue on the path that we're on with no external major shift, what does the next generation look like in 20 years' time in terms of life expectancy, in terms of health, in terms of education?
I'm scared to do those projections, but like Amartya Sen said, we've taken a giant leap in the wrong direction, and that's where we're going. So we have a small window of opportunity.
So are we saying that unless there is specific external input, agency, focus, things will continue down the path that they are?
It doesn't look very hopeful, does it?
I agree. I think that if you're comfortable and in fact proud of the way things are in your country, then there's no scope of being able to fix what is wrong.
Exactly.
My last question is this. You've been to Bangladesh and Nepal at a point in time where India's relations with these two states and the people within them have become difficult.
Yeah.
What was your anecdotal experience of meeting as an Indian people in Bangladesh and what they thought about what was going on here?
So Bangladeshis, I got red carpet treatment in Bangladesh. They really love Indians. It's just such a pity the way we're denigrating them now. And as the tide with India changed, so every trip that I did, I would either get a hostile reception or a great reception. In Bangladesh, overall, there's a lot of love for Indians. But of course, they're extremely upset with, it's not like they don't hear the news, right? So they had to connect with me, and we all know, I mean, working in people-to-people movements, that when you connect with people across borders at a personal level, it's quite different, and they realize that you don't necessarily endorse what governments do. In Nepal, I write the story of how it changed after the economic blockade and before.
Could you very briefly tell us about the blockade for those of us who don't know? Okay, what happened?
Indian government officially denies any role in the blockade, but for 6 months, when the Nepali constitution was getting decided, there was a lot of interference, and the road that I used to take, the Birgunj border, was jam-packed with trucks full of essential supplies that Nepal usually takes from us. And so for 6 months, Nepalis didn't have cooking fuel, and they cut down their forest just to get wood. They didn't have medicines, they didn't have blood banks, were empty, etc. And so when I used to go before the border, they actually were really happy with having a Hindu-led government in India the previous time that I went. And the second time that I went, they were like really hostile, and I was wondering what happened. And then they told me how much they suffered during the entire economic blockade, which barely made our news headlines. And then, of course, the tide thawed when I spoke to the family a little more. So I think what we're doing across our borders is really worrying.
You presumably left out Pakistan because there was no access.
No, I've been to Pakistan before, but Pakistan is poorer than us and does worse than us in social indicators. So I was like, why? In fact, I think that's a big, big distraction, that we're always comparing ourselves to the worst in South Asia. There's no point. We should compare to the best, and that is Sri Lanka.
On that happy note, questions from the audience and comments are also fine, but
Yes.
try and keep them brief,
We
please.
spoke too much.
We can start with this gentleman here.
Hi, Mr. Patel. Hi, Swati. Fantastic session.
Could you please, introduce yourself very briefly, name and what it is that you do.
Of course. My name is Ashan and I work in public policy research. I had a couple of thoughts and I'd like you to elaborate on certain aspects of the book. First being caste-based stratification, right? You mentioned specifically when it comes to land holdings in primary and secondary education, how the situation is far worse in Bihar than in Bangladesh and Nepal. The second part was access to markets. So that's not something I saw specifically heavily researched as part of the book, but you did mention that the female labor force participation here was lower than in Afghanistan during the Taliban's regime, right? And one of the issues with that is even if you look at the South Indian states like Tamil Nadu and Kerala, even though we have high GERs up to 12th, high GERs in higher education, we still have low female labor force participation in the workforce. We have higher female unemployment, right? So that's sort of a labor demand issue along with a social norms issue there. And my third, this is a little tangential, but I would like your thoughts on this, is given the recent happenstances in Ashoka and the stepping down of Yamini Iyer in CPR, what is your opinion about the future of research in India?
Thank you.
Oh, should I answer them? Okay, so on caste, education, land holdings, there's a lot of data in the book itself, so I think you can easily have a look at that, including the great inequality in distribution of land in Bihar and how Bangladesh had a land reform during the Pakistan period. In Nepal also, based with every caste have given the availability of land, and you don't have that level of land poverty or landless households as you have in India, especially in Bihar. In terms of markets and women's access to markets, you're right, it's both cultural and it's also, I mean, the lack of availability of jobs, feminization of certain professions, not of others. And I would actually say that just the tremendous disempowerment of women in India and how we're treated. I mean, yeah, I think any woman, every woman in the room can answer this question easily. Lastly, about the future of research, what's happening. I think I've put in it somewhere, right? About the suffragettes. Courage everywhere calls to courage everywhere. I think that's just the only way. A lot of my research I was able to do because I never take grant funding or anything like that. At best, you know, at the lowest level, most of it comes from my savings, and we work with students or do things at very low cost. And there are always ways to do really good research if you really believe in it. I think we should just stay the course. And be as strong as we can. Thank you.
We'll have somebody here. This gentleman in the front row, please. And then we'll go here, then we'll come back here.
Well, thank you very much for an enlightening session. My name is Vikram. I'm a retired professional, so I won't make any other comments. Just a clarification. You have spoken about Bangladesh and Nepal as countries, but of India, largely of Bihar. I was just wondering that in the sampling that you've undertaken, did you choose the poorest part of this country? And were you careful enough to choose poorer parts of both Nepal and Bangladesh to make the comparisons?
Thank you.
Yes. So I write about 4 or 5 pages in the book exactly about that question because I always get asked that. Yes, and that's why I said the wealth index that I created of the households across those countries, across the villages, was similar. Yeah.
Yes, please. The lady here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Shaima. I'm a journalist. So I wanted to ask that you talked about the toilet facilities and women empowerment. I wanted to know about the awareness about menstrual hygiene or the facilities that these 4 countries have. What did you find different, and which country was lagging behind and how?
So it's not an area that I covered too much, but like I said, anecdotally, in Bangladesh, in every single toilet that women were using, there were this cute little bag with cloth. In Nepal, in fact, even the researchers I had, so I write that in the book, I actually worked with students and they were totally comfortable with sex education, whereas in Bihar, it was because I had some questions on family planning in my survey. The mothers of my researchers got very angry that they were that they had to ask these questions door to door. Yeah.
We'll come here. I think there was a question there. Yes. Wait for the microphone. We are being recorded, and this will be shown on YouTube. So it's best if you wait till the microphone comes.
Okay, so firstly, like kudos on very systematic and painstaking work, and secondly, also like I think very important point on our awareness that where we are as a developing country. But like I think just following up on this selection bias question, it's not just that the wealth index is for households, but Bihar is 1/4 as rich as Sri Lanka is, 1/3 in nominal terms as Bangladesh is, also poorer than Nepal is. Also, you'll use purchasing power, but that involves the cost that labor is paid, and people are paid less because of that. So there's an interesting choice that we choose Bihar, but also that we talk about social movements, and in the south they have worked well, but it's also true that Bihar and UP have been run largely by caste parties, and it's a place where it hasn't worked. I'd like to know why does left caste parties work in one place and not the other. Secondly, when you were choosing, talking about, Bangladesh and Islam, I also think there's a choice there that's made. One other state right next to Bangladesh is West Bengal, where we had the partition. It also had a left government. So it's, again, a selection when you're choosing the place where left worked and the place it didn't. So it's easy always to go back to Kerala in that sense. The third thing is that fourth is about the developments in Bangladesh after 2005, it's true that social movements and the NGO space, Mohammed Yunus and Grameen Bank, and different models have come together. It's very vibrant, but it's also true that's the time where the garment industry was unleashing. And the state saw a huge kind of expansion in its resources because the welfare net grew, because GDP grew, investments grew, employment grew, women were getting jobs, etc. So it's a more complicated story than it seems that your presentation presents. And it seems that if we don't pick these facts, we risk making it seems that we have cherry-picked.
Right, so really good point. And I really wish, I think in 1 hour it's hard for me to condense the entire book. So literally every single thing that you've said, I've answered in the book. Why not West Bengal? So let me just again say, it's not just about the wealth index amongst the villages. My options were Bihar or Uttar Pradesh, because A, they're representative of the northern states and have a per capita income in purchasing power parity terms that was comparable to Bangladesh and Nepal. So there's a graph that I put in there. The problem with West Bengal, and in fact I started my research with assuming I would do Bangladesh and West Bengal, was that West Bengal's per capita income was not even in the same range. It was so high. So that is why I was not able to compare. I wouldn't, if I had gone to the village, I would have not been able to find households that would have been comparable across borders. So that is the main reason. I totally understand your point of cherry picking, but I think I really ensured that I didn't do that because that would have defeated the whole purpose. In terms of overall Bangladeshi economy booming, I think the employment in the ready-made garment industry only for women at 90% plus is excellent, but it's also several other factors, agro-processing and other industries which have boomed, and I write about all of that. Their industries are very close to their villages. So it's sort of like Tamil Nadu, a good road network, and very interesting development story leading to a growth story.
You won't find a sharper audience anywhere else in India. Yes. The lady in the back there, please. Could you wait till the microphone is turned on?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Shloka and I work as a pre-doc in psychology and development. Thank you for your amazing research. I have so many questions that it's hard to pick one. But I think I'd most like to ask about education because we know about our current demographic dividend and how 70% of Indians are under 30 years old and so many of them of school-going age. And so I wonder what you would most change in the classroom about what we teach and how we teach our children?
I'll be honest, I think our demographic dividend, or so-called one, is a demographic disaster right now. And I'll tell you why. Because after COVID, we are in a mass learning crisis. we had the longest school closures in the world, almost 1.5 to 2 years. Go to Bihar, go to Uttar Pradesh, children are doing far worse as per the ASER surveys than before COVID. And there's been no effort. In fact, we've met bureaucrats, we've met ministers. Last time I went to Jharkhand, we were trying to convince the ministers, please look at what Tamil Nadu has done. They have a, they used a lot of local volunteers, ITK if I'm not mistaken, after COVID to help children re-remember what they had learned before and get back to school. And Tamil Nadu classrooms are something else because they use continuous and comprehensive evaluation. But in Bihar and Jharkhand and Uttar Pradesh and Madhya Pradesh, just look at the state of education. So, and after COVID, I think we just not, textbooks don't come on time, teachers are not there. So, whereas Bangladesh has adopted joyful learning techniques, the NGOs have taken over the training of teachers in many places, and they're reaping the dividends of that. We have a lot to do in education.
Yes, please. Could you wait till the microphone comes? Thank you.
Could you just comment on the role of NGOs in the 3 countries? Because I know in Bangladesh they have played a huge role in the development and taking the dividend of development to the lesser population.
Yeah, so actually I started my PhD assuming it is going to be a very simple story. I'm just going to congratulate all the NGOs and what they have done. But actually, I realized after doing so much fieldwork in Bangladesh that actually it was the Bangladeshi state, the government, and NGOs have only confined themselves in Bangladesh to being service providers. Even Muhammad Yunus was removed from his own organization. And there are limits to how much NGOs can do. They deliver services, provide competition to government services in quality, and that's about it. Again, in Nepal, NGOs have been extremely important, but I would give far more importance to the Dalit movement, to the Jan Andolans, and to this dream, this collective dream for Naya Nepal, which has come post-democracy. So that is it. And ultimately, in all these countries, unless the state is the only provider of public services, it's its responsibility and it needs to fulfill it. At best, NGOs are just filling a gap.
What are the outcomes that Naya Nepal is meant to achieve?
Right. So I asked them, what is your slogans for Naya Nepal? So they said something like Savarna, but my pronunciation is not right. So basically, freedom from upper caste oppression, women's liberation. And before the Maoist war started, they gave a 14-point agenda to the king. And that included things like we want land reform, we want women's empowerment, and it was very specific, I think 14 if I'm not mistaken. So that all constituted the Naya Nepal.
Thank you. Yes, the lady here in the second row. And then maybe just after her, the gentleman behind her. We'll try and break the pattern.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for a wonderful session. I have 2 small questions. You mentioned Dalit Bangladeshis also. So I'm intrigued by that because my name is Wahida and I want to know more about that.
Right.
The second is, I am a Muslim in today's India. Should I fight or flight?
Wow. It's full solidarity. I think actions speak louder than words, and I don't know how I could possibly answer that question except saying that I've come from Ajmer right now. And it feels so terrible that you're even asking me that question because ours is something we pride on being the most secular country, and you're asking me this question during Ramzan. So I really hope we can actually, whether or not you read the book, we can really do something collectively to ensure our constitutional principles stay strong. Lastly, about Dalits in Bangladesh, yes, across South Asia, Dalits remain the most oppressed. In Bangladesh, so even some of my survey questions I had to understand. And one very interesting person I met, Meghna Guha Thakurta, she told me that in Bangladesh they've also, so caste has become eco-caste. That is based on the ecological environment, especially in the Sundarban areas, different castes do different things. But both amongst Muslims and Hindus, Dalits exist or don't form part of the Hindus, and they do lead In the northern, so it differs between North and South Bangladesh. In North Bangladesh, in many places they can't enter barbers, shops, etc. So, but the solidarity of South Asian Dalits is so strong that I've just come back from Nepal World Social Forum, and that's the only way forward, with solidarity moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Just behind her. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Sandeep. I work in civil society. Thank you for the session, very informative. You put down the success of the southern states to social movements that happened 100 years ago or whenever. I just wanted to know if there are any social movements happening currently that gives you any kind of optimism or any hope in the country.
We are all part of social movements. There are identity movements, and the work that I largely do is with the right to food, right to health, and so just in Jaipur, I saw the tremendous impact of the first state in India to pass a right to health law. Free medicines, free diagnostics, free everything. The primary healthcare center had long queues, which is why a lot of us have dedicated our lives to being part of these movements to ensure that people get concrete public services as welfare, right? To transform lives, to transform human development. Sorry, I just...
No, it's fine.
No, I've lost the train of thought, but I think I answered most of your question, yeah?
The gentleman in the back, please.
So this is Parag, I'm a venture capitalist. Let's come to a book full of despondency, India is broken. I just wanted to see what the overlaps are. Some of his learnings are similar. But the fact that our government, each of our governments, have failed us is one thing that I wanted you to comment on in particular.
I unfortunately have not read that book, but I agree with you. I think all governments, successive governments, have failed. And I was trying to look at what is the reason for this failure. If there is so much social distance between the ruling class and us as citizens, why is the social contract broken? In the case of Bangladesh and Nepal, it seems to be a historical accident, in some cases violent historical accidents, like a liberation war or a famine or a Maoist war, creating a new social contract. In India, for some reason, some states in India seem to have renegotiated the social contract. But for the country as a whole, I feel we are not demanding enough from our ruling class because there's such a big disparity between them and us. And now there is a wealth disparity. Maybe the rulers are not the real rulers. Maybe it's just the wealthy who are the real rulers, right? So how do we bridge that? Is just collective action. Have they failed us? Absolutely.
The book that was referred to is by this man called Ashok Modi out of Princeton, I think. Came out last year, and I think well worth reading. His thesis is that beginning with Nehru, there was never any hope given the direction India took to be able to become developed. So we will go, yes sir, right in front.
Hey, Pritesh here, I'm a finance professional. I think just to kind of make his question a little more sharper, I wanted to get your opinion on whether the disparity we see in the country is attributable to a lack of efficient feedback loops between like what is happening on the ground and what like policymakers think. Could be because of India being a very diverse community where like languages could play a part in it, or like just cultural understandings could play a part of it, or even like the federal structure that we have. Or is it just a lack of political will and an understanding of the ground realities? Like, what do you attribute this to?
I think, as I said in the book, it's social distance. If the community that is ruling, or if the caste that's ruling, if the religion that's ruling is so disconnected from the rest of the citizens, that's creating the other problems. Yeah.
This side, yes sir.
Can we reverse that?
Sorry.
Of course.
We'll have him, and then we'll have the gentleman in the back there.
I'm Sanjeev. Among other things, we run the F&B in this building, the cafe downstairs. So, you know, I've been just thinking that you mentioned a few things like the Maoists and the left being weak now. Do you think that's a problem? Because in China, the central party system has worked. And also when Manmohan Singh was there, he made one statement. He said, I run only 35% of India. And in those days, I think the Naxalbari movement and the Maoist movement in various parts of India was very rampant. I think that's all been reduced or stamped out. But do you think that what we lack now is a sort of a counterweight, or at least when you say activism or you say NGO, do you think social unrest itself is missing, or it's too calm and quiet and something is going to happen?
I personally would not advocate any violent social unrest, including the Maoist movement. I write in the book about how in Bihar the Maoist movement was crushed by militias, private militias of the upper caste, like the Ranveer Sena, the Suar Sena, etc., with different castes creating their own armies. Perhaps that's where it's going in large parts of India, will re-emerge again. So I don't think it's about control of geographical territory. If you're saying like Nepal, are the million mutinies missing? No, I think they are there everywhere. They're not consolidated.
One of the things that I think we haven't necessarily thought through is the disempowerment of states with the surrendering of taxation fully with GST. You've got states that no longer have the kind of power that they did, even the limited power. The gentleman in the back there, and then the gentleman here.
I'm KJ Subs. I'm a lifestyle medicine practitioner. Phenomenal, very informative. The interlocutor was amazing. You brought out the best in her. I want to give the benefit of doubt to India, okay, playing devil's advocate largely. Do you suppose it's about this underdog syndrome? It's so much easier for an underdog to get over everything that was holding them back, plus the fact that India is such a large country. Now, if you look at all the innovation, okay, they happen in startups, not in very large corporations. Do you think that had a role to play in this whole disparity?
I'm in Bangalore, so of course people are going to speak of startups and is this a Silicon Valley of India? I'll be honest, I'm coming from Haryana. Every second person is asking me for a job. The level of unemployment in this country right now is extraordinary amongst young and educated people. It's almost 42% in the 20 to 24 age group. So I think we are in the richest part of the country right now, perhaps. But in large parts of the other India, yeah, two Indias, yeah. It is not about underdogs. I think I wish we could support underdogs to make change, but that will require a structural transformation, is what I'm trying to say, rather than just band-aid solutions.
Yeah. I don't know if we are in the time of human history where you can transfer. There are 500 million jobs somewhere waiting to be sent to India. They're not there. So gentleman here, and then after that, gentleman there.
Hi, I'm Nikhil. I'm a journalist. I just want to know your thoughts on what has the media done perhaps differently in some of the other countries that you've looked at, and how does that compare to what's happening here?
That's a really good question. I need to do a second research, really, honestly, to speak about that. All I can say is Indian media. Today I don't own a TV, but I was in a hotel, so I tried to use the remote. I literally couldn't see a single news channel. I would love to do that in future. I don't know.
I couldn't see, as in it was all unwatchable. Did you notice any?
You know, there's a song that is 100 channels of TV and nothing to watch.
57.
Pink Floyd, whatever. So it was literally like that. And then even when I saw the international collaboration channel, CNN with some other channel with, I was like, I don't want to watch this either. It was unwatchable. Go the media.
Is it very different in Bangladesh and Nepal?
So sorry, I don't know because I don't own a TV. So even there, I have never switched on a TV. So I can't answer this question.
Gentleman here, please.
Hi, I'm Arindam Goswami. I'm a software professional and trying to be a public policy researcher also. Taking off from what Aakar just mentioned about the role of states, so is decentralization something that's better implemented either in Nepal or Bangladesh, and did you see that making an impact? And the second question is whether a rights-based framework is better implemented there, and could that be a reason for better outcomes? So you mentioned about Forest Rights Act being better implemented in Nepal, I guess, right? So something of that sort. So does that help?
Both superb questions. So firstly, for Bangladesh and Nepal, they don't have chief ministers, right? It's like Bihar, you'll have one chief minister as a head, so they just have a prime minister. So there is, in terms of provincial, they do have ward level, which is our block level. And they have quite, so even a panchayat office of their equivalent is extraordinarily good, empowered with money, and very corrupt in Bangladesh. Similarly in Nepal. So there's a lot of devolution of power and financial resources. Not necessarily in a federal structure, because even Bihar, I was only looking at one. The second, it just reminded me, the second question was? Rights-based, okay, of course. So again, two different stories. In the case of Nepal, it has followed the rights-based path with a lot of, as I said, either left of center or left-wing parties in power. And in the case of Bangladesh, it's very interesting. It's considered to be a paradox with bad politics but good development, and that development has not followed the rights-based path. In fact, Bangladeshi, both NGOs and activist stalwarts were telling us, this is one thing we want to learn from India. How do we enshrine rights? Because it continues to remain very top-down. So that's an interesting...
We have time for one last... Maybe we'll take two questions together and then we'll close with that.
Yeah.
Two of the gentlemen.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I work as an AI technologist. Thank you for this illuminating session. My question is... you mentioned one of the premises of your argument was that the egalitarian state is a progenitor for better economic indicators. Me hailing from Tamil Nadu, I understand that they have a political mindset in Periyar where they get the state gets egalitarian perspective, and society has philosophers like Tiruvallur, where it is deeply embedded into them. Are agents of egalitarianism part of this of society, or is it part of the state, or a conflation of both?
Thank you. And we'll take the last question from the gentleman behind you, and then she can answer both together.
I actually want to end on a positive question.
Yes.
You mentioned Ajita is here,
yes.
And I have read another book from a student of development in Bihar, Last Among Equals by M.R. Sharan.
Yes.
And I am now looking forward to reading your book. What I want to ask really is, what is it that development economists are doing in Bihar, in Jharkhand, led by or motivated by people like Jean Drèze and Amartya Sen? And what has been your experience? What does that team look like? What gives us these excellent books and excellent development numbers? Depressing however they are important. And it comes out of dedicated researchers like yourselves. So maybe tell us a little bit about that. Thank you.
Sure. First, the question on Tamil Nadu and egalitarianism. Does it come from state? Does it come from society? It can also, I think it largely comes from, I don't think there's such a dichotomy between the state and the society, right? It is members of society who are elected to be part of the state or who form part of the bureaucracy, etc. And like you said, it's important to have a philosophical underpinning for it, whether it comes from Periyar, whether it comes, let's say, from Buddhism or Islam or any other, or any religion that doesn't consider inequality to be its foundational premise. Whether it could be religious, it could be societal, it could be philosophical, etc. But the fact that that could have a big imprint on the character of a society and then the character of a state is, I think, so that is really important. But let's say 100 years ago in Kerala, the fundamental premise was that we are all unequal, that different castes should stand 7 feet away from each other. They should not look at each other. So that transformation has to happen in societal consciousness, that we go from assuming the basis of human rights that all people are equal, that all children are born equal, as opposed to the fact, or a caste-based premise, that we are all unequal, and on top of that we are on a hierarchy where one is higher than or supposedly better than someone else. So absolutely. And to answer your lovely question, so M.R. Sharan, in fact, the village where he wrote that book is the same village where I stayed with Sanjay Sani's team. And so in the mornings, I used to do my field work, and in the evenings, fight with them for NREGA. And they're very inspiring. So there is no structure to the team. A lot of people are just inspired by, there's now, anyway, Jharkhand has a very strong activist culture because of, you know, the Adivasi movement is really strong in Jharkhand, including for the creation of the state. In the case of Bihar, and in fact, any state in India, there are activists everywhere who are trying their level best to do good work against odds. There is no structure, but I think it's the inspiration that produces books. Thanks for reading that book too.
Thank you. The book is Unequal. Thank you to Swati Narayan. The book's on sale outside. Thank you to BIC for doing this. Thank you to the audience for being so fantastic, as you are usually.
And thanks to Ajit and Westland for bringing out
Thank you to
books.
Westland for doing this.
I'd like to thank Swati Narayan and Aakar Patel for bringing today's session to BIC. I'd also like to thank the audience for their time, interest, and questions. Both the authors' books are available for purchase outside and for author signing. Thank you and have a good night.